So first of all, I want to introduce myself, na? Myself, Dr. Lalit Agarwal, Assistant Professor in Department of Urology. So I have done my MBBS from here only, MBBS MS, MBBS 2004 batch. So it is pleasant to interact with you all students. So renal tumors, na? So we'll start by renal tumors. So first of all, my slides are visible.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir,
Okay.
visible.
Okay, first of all, we will see, in kidney, there are 2-3 parts which are important. This is renal capsule, this is renal cortex, and medulla. These are vessels. So most of the tumors arise from the cortex. These are nephrons, part of the nephrons. So we can classify renal tumors either into benign or malignant. So according to the part of the kidney involved, like from the pelvic calyceal system, there will be, in the benign tumor, it will be papilloma, transitional cell, in the malignant, transitional cell carcinoma or squamous cell carcinoma rarely. From the parenchyma like cortex, it will be benign, will be renal papillary adenoma or metanephric adenoma. And in malignant, renal cell carcinoma, that is the most common and most important topic. And in children, mainly Wilms tumor. From the perinephric fat, similarly, lipoma, liposarcoma, vessels, hemangioma, hemangiosarcoma, or angiomyolipoma can have all three components. And secondary tumors are mostly metastatic, that is malignant. So other way of classification of renal tumor is, we can define by the part involved. Like in malignant renal cell carcinoma, there can be multiple variants according to the pathology. Clear cell is the most common. Other are papillary, or also called chromophilic, chromophobe, medullary, etc. है ना? In urothelium based tumors, urothelial carcinoma or transitional cell carcinoma, or rarely squamous and adenocarcinoma. There are sarcomas. There can be also nephroblastic tumor. Most common is Wilms tumor. And other are carcinoma associated with neuroblastoma. That is neuroendocrine tumors that can also rise from the kidney. Now, there can be also secondary metastasis to the kidney from other organs, or invasion by other tumors, malignant tumors. Among benign tumors, there can be cysts, there can be simple cysts or complex cysts. Other can be benign tumor solid lesion, that is most common are angiomyolipoma, oncocytoma, papillary adenoma, metanephric tumor. So there is a long list. I will not go in detail. There can be vascular tumor, that can be renal artery aneurysm or AV malformation, pseudotumors that can arise from the kidney, and inflammatory tumors, in which there can be abscess, focal pyelonephritis, xanthogranulomatous pyelonephritis, tuberculosis, and cyst. Okay. So cyst we can classify as, I already told you, simple cystic or complex cystic. We can also classify tumors according to the enhancement on the CT scan or MRI. So strongly enhancing tumors are clear cell renal cell carcinoma or AML and oncocytoma. Papillary and chromophobe are rarely moderately enhancing. So moderately papillary, chromophobe, rarely clear cell also, oncocytoma, and fat poor angiomyolipoma. Sarcomas, lymphomas, these are moderately enhancing. We can also classify by multifocal or bilateral masses. So that can be metastatic or familial most commonly. But sometimes sporadic tumors are also multifocal and bilateral. In tuberous sclerosis, AML is also bilateral and multifocal most of the time. There can be cystic tumors in the autosomal dominant polycystic kidney disease. Some tumors are infiltrative masses, mainly lymphomas, sarcomas, collecting duct carcinoma, urothelial carcinoma, renal medullary carcinoma. So these have infiltrative tendency, so have poor prognosis. Other as calcified mass. As we know, renal cell carcinoma can also have calcification. That can also occur in urothelial carcinoma. So how do we evaluate renal mass? If the patient comes with hematuria or abdominal mass, obviously then there comes the differential diagnosis of renal tumor other than other intraperitoneal organs tumors. So first of all, we will have routine investigation like urine routine microscopy and urine culture, in which urine routine analysis, we will look for hematuria, RBCs. If more than 5, that is microscopic hematuria. We will also rule out crystal stones. Urine culture, we will look out for infection. What is the organism involved? Then coming to the specific investigations. IVP. In IVP, there can be calcification, increased tissue density, irregularity of the margins, and distortion of the collecting system due to pressure effect. But detection by IV is only possible in 21% of the cases when lesion is smaller than 2 centimeter, 52% when 2 to 3 centimeter, and 85% when 3 centimeter or more than 3 centimeter. So we can miss the small tumor. So IVP is not advised for the renal mass evaluation. So we can look for there is a soft tissue density, that is displacing the pelvic calyceal system. This is normal on the right side. Similarly, we can visualize some spherical structure or density displacing the PCS, that is suggestive of tumor. Similarly, in this film, we can look, there is some evidences are suggestive of left renal mass. So first of all, we have ultrasound as the initial screening procedure for any pain or abdominal lump. In ultrasound, we can look for the differentiation of solid and cystic mass. It can also allow the diagnosis of AML by the characterization of increased echogenicity. So if question comes, ultrasound have increased echogenicity in AML. And we can classify cystic tumor into simple and complex cyst. So what are the features of simple cyst on ultrasound? So first of all, there will be smooth cystic wall. There will be round or oval shape, means round shape, not irregular shape. Third, it will be without internal echoes. So there will be clear fluid, no turbid fluid, and no calcification or septation. So if these features are not there, then it will be complex cyst. This is renal mass on ultrasound, solid tumor we can appreciate. But here we can appreciate simple cyst with clear fluid, spherical, round shape. There are no turbid fluid, no posterior acoustic shadow. So it is renal cyst. So in exam, we can tell the findings of the renal cyst on ultrasound. So if ultrasound is equivocal and we cannot determine the nature of the mass, whether it's simple cyst, complex cyst, or solid renal tumor, then we have to proceed to CT scan, CCT abdomen. So first we do the urea creatinine. If it's normal, then we go for CCT. So a renal CT scan remains the single most important radiographic test for delineating the nature of the renal mass. So in general, renal cell carcinoma enhanced by 15 Hounsfield unit on CCT image. So first we have to ask in the examiner. First we want to check for the plain CT film. There we will appreciate the tumor, and then we will compare with the contrast CT film after giving contrast. So if there is more than 15 Hounsfield unit, that is suggestive of renal malignancy. So this is without contrast, that is plain film of the CT scan. We can appreciate lower polar mass is there. But after giving contrast, kidney will also enhance and tumor will also enhance. So if it is more than 15 Hounsfield unit, that is suggestive of renal malignancy. Similarly, in this film, this is plain film, this is enhanced film. This is also same, showing small exophytic tumor, mainly outside the parenchyma. That is ideal for the nephron sparing surgery or partial nephrectomy. This is another film, though in plain film, mass is not so clearly visible, but if we will see the contrast film, so there is some cystic tumor is there. Now, most of the time we advise for CT scan, but sometimes we have to take the help of MRI. So MRI is reserved for when there is contrast hypersensitivity used in the CT scan, or there is high serum creatinine, or if there is suspicion of vascular invasion or IVC thrombus in case of CT scan. Then we go for MRI abdomen. Other investigations are sometimes we go for the renal mass biopsy in case of abscess or metastasis, or in case of renal lymphoma. So what, after determining the stage by CT scan, we have to do the metastatic workup also. We have to do the routine investigation like CBC, RFT, LFT, LFT for rule out liver metastasis. We have to do the routine chest radiograph, chest X-ray, whether it is suggestive of cannonball opacity, that is suggestive of pulmonary metastasis. In some cases, when patient is symptomatic, like hemoptysis is there, dyspnea is there, and chest radiography is suggestive of pulmonary metastasis, then we have to go for chest CT scan. So in all cases, chest CT is not required. Chest radiography is sufficient. Bone scan when there is bony pain or increased alkaline phosphatase or poor performance status, then we can go for bone scan for bony metastatic evaluation. So we have to rule out the metastatic before going for the radical nephrectomy or definitive surgical procedure. So most common site of metastasis is, we all know, it's lung. So renal mass suspected on the imaging, we have defined whether it's complex or simple. If simple cyst, then we can observe. If complex cystic or solid mass, then we have to decide what investigation we have to do. So if there is no contrast allergy and GFR is more than 45, then we can go for CCT abdomen or MRI, contrast MRI with gadolinium. If 30 to 45, first we have to hydrate the patient, then we can go for CT scan. Otherwise, there will be chances of nephropathy, contrast-induced nephropathy due to CT scan, or nephrogenic systemic fibrosis due to MRI, gadolinium contrast. If GFR is less than 30, then we have to go for non-contrast study or ultrasound or contrast-enhanced ultrasound. Then we have to classify whether it is simple, complex cyst. If fat is there, that is suggestive of AML, that will have minus 20 Hounsfield unit or less. If solid mass, then accordingly we have to evaluate, classify, and then management. So revision that I will skip. So coming to the benign renal tumors in brief. So that if arising from the cortical tissue, that can be adenoma or oncocytoma, and there can be tumors arising from the mesenchymal tissue, that is angiomyolipoma. Angioma means blood vessel, myo means muscle, lipoma means fat. So it will have all three components. So in renal mass, sometimes it's very difficult to differentiate benign or malignant on the basis of imaging like CT scan or abdomen. So sometimes we have to take the help of the renal mass biopsy. So that is also an indication of renal mass biopsy. So first, renal papillary adenoma, it's an epithelial lesion with a tubulopapillary architecture. Usually these are less than 0.5 centimeters. And mostly we can follow them, and sometimes they require surgical excision. Other is oncocytoma. These epithelial tumor composed of oncocytes or large eosinophilic cells having small to round benign appearing nuclei with large nucleoli. These usually arise from the intercalated cells of the collecting duct of the kidney. Unfortunately, as I already told, it is very difficult, especially oncocytoma, to differentiate from the renal malignant mass on imaging CT scan. So sometimes we have to do surgery, and then we can clarify whether it's a benign tumor or malignant tumor. Other benign tumors are AML, angiomyolipoma. Approximately 20 to 30% of the AML are found in patients with tuberous sclerosis syndrome. That is an autosomal dominant disorder characterized by epiloa, that is mnemonic. Epi say epilepsy, low mental retardation, low IQ, and A, adenoma sebaceum. Generally, AML occurs in middle-aged female. It can be asymptomatic most of the time, or sometimes there can be loin pain, hematuria, palpable mass, and hypovolemic shock because of the rupture. So next, AML can be diagnosed by the presence of the even a small amount of the fat within a renal lesion on CT scan, that is minus 20 Hounsfield unit or lower. So that excludes the RCC. That is suggestive of AML management. If it is asymptomatic and smaller, less than 4 centimeter, then we can observe. Intervention should be considered for the large tumors if it is more than 4 centimeter, particularly if the patient is symptomatic. So this is an algorithm for AML. If CT MRI diagnostic of AML, no AML, then we can observe. If it is equivocal, then we can have renal mass biopsy, as I suggest. If we cannot differentiate benign from malignant, then we can go for biopsy. If still equivocal, then we can have 2-3 options in AML. Basically, when we have to intervene, either we can do the ablative therapy, that is RFA, radiofrequency ablation or cryoablation, or partial or total radical nephrectomy. Partial is preferred. And we can also do the embolization, selective artery embolization, especially in case of hemorrhage, shock, or limited renal ridge or poor operative candidate. So AML, if it's symptomatic, then we have all those options, and if no tuberous sclerosis, these all options are there. If tuberous sclerosis is suspected on the genetic testing, then sometimes there is role of neoadjuvant therapy, that is everolimus, that are mTOR inhibitors, and then we can go for surgery or ablative therapy. And if it is ruptured AML or hemorrhage is there, then selective renal arterial embolization. If asymptomatic, no tuberous sclerosis, and less than 4 mm aneurysm, or greater than 4 centimeter intralesional aneurysm but more than 5 mm in thickness, then most of the time surveillance is sufficient. But if patient is of females of childbearing age or pilot, then we can go for surgical excision or embolization. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So coming to the classification of the renal cyst, that you have to remember what is the name Bosniak classification. There are 4 categories: 1, 2, 2F, 3, and 4. 1 is simple cyst, so no therapy or surveillance is required. 2 is there is risk of malignancy of 18% approximate. In there are 2 and 2F. F means follow up. So in category 2, there is no therapy or follow up is required. But what are the findings other than simple cyst? There can be few hairline septa, few calcifications. So that will be 2 category. In 2F, there will be multiple hairline septa or minimal smooth thickening of the wall or septa. So this will be the 2F. In 3, there will be the indeterminate cystic mass that have thickened irregular or smooth wall or septa, in which measurable contrast enhancement is there. So in 2 and 2F, no contrast enhancement. In 3, there will be measurable contrast enhancement. Risk of malignancy will be 33%. In that case, we require active surveillance or excision or ablative therapy. Basically, we have to intervene most of the time. In 4, these are mostly malignant, approximately 90% of the time. That other than 3, they will also have soft tissue component, enhancing soft tissue component. So these requires always either by excision or ablative therapy. So coming to RCC, RCC has been known by other tumors like hypernephroma, Graves tumor, or internist tumor, or renal adenocarcinoma. Generally, these are arise from proximal convoluted tubule, mainly clear cell. Most common age is 5 to 6 decade. Males are more common as compared to females by 2:1. These constitute approximately 2 to 3% of all malignant neoplasm. Median age is 55 to 75 years, mostly are sporadic, only 4 to 6% are familial. And bilateral tumors occurs in 2 to 4%, multicentricity in 10 to 20, mainly in the papillary tumors, and bilateral mainly in the hereditary tumors. So after second days, RCC is the most common renal tumor, but as we know, before 10 years, Wilms tumor is generally common renal tumor. malignant renal tumor. But in the second stage, these are equally common, Wilms and RCC. But sometimes if it's like an objective question, RCC is more common as compared to Wilms, even in the second decade. Coming to the risk factor etiology, most common etiology is environmental etiology. If we are speaking, tobacco exposure is most common, approximately 2 times risk. Others are obesity, hypertension, heavy metals exposures. Now coming to genetic factors. So generally there are syndromes associated. That is most common is VHL syndrome, affecting 50% of the individuals with this autosomal dominant syndrome have RCC. What are other features in the VHL syndrome? So there can be involvement of the CNS or other visceral involvement. In CNS, there can be retinal hemangioblastoma, endolymphatic sac tumors, or hemangioblastoma of the cerebellum, brainstem, or spinal cord. There can be renal cell carcinoma or renal cyst, pheochromocytoma, pancreatic cyst and pancreatic neuroendocrine tumors, epididymal cystadenoma, and broad ligament cystadenoma. This is classification of the VHL. It can be of 3 types, type 1, 2, and 3. So generally in type 1 there are deletions, in 2 and 2 ABC have missense mutations. So we have to remember, so there can be in type 1 like there can be RCC, CNS tumors, and FEO is low. As an objective we can remember in type 2C there is no RCC. These are familial tumors other than VHL. VHL I have already discussed. Mutation is in the 3p chromosome. Generally, there is rule of 3 in the VHL. If it is less than 3 centimeter, we can have surveillance because sometimes these are multiple and bilateral tumors. So it is not so important to excise all the tumors. So risk of malignancy is low in less than 3 centimeter tumors. But if it is more than 3 centimeters, then we have to do surgical excision, mainly nephron sparing surgery. Other is hereditary papillary RCC that have MET mutation. There can be 2 types. Type 1 is type 1 papillary RCC, that is hereditary papillary RCC. Similar management is most similar in all familial tumors. Hereditary leiomyomatosis and RCC, that is type 2 papillary RCC. In this, there is mutation in fumarate hydrate. These have other carcinoma also collecting that leiomyomas, uterine leiomyosarcomas. So these have poor prognosis as compared to type 1. So we have to intervene little early, surgical excision. There can be other familial tumors, that is succinate dehydrogenase deficient RCC, Barth-Hogdeup syndrome, that I want to discuss. There is mutation in folliculin 17p chromosome. There can be multiple chromophobe RCC or hybrid oncocytic tumor containing both onco and chromophobe. Rarely clear and papillary. Other features are facial fibrofolliculomas, lung cyst, and spontaneous pneumothorax. Other are P10 associated RCC, tuberous sclerosis. So in tuberous sclerosis, there can be mutation in tuberous sclerosis 1 or 2. 1 9q, 2 is 16p. There can be multiple renal angiomyolipomas. There can be clear cell RCCs in 2 to 3% cases, or renal cyst, cardiac rhabdomyomas, cutaneous angiomyofibromas. So these are features. AML management I have already discussed. So this is RCC. Mainly we can appreciate the cystic and solid tumors. So generally it's golden yellow in clear cell. So what are pathological types? Most common is clear cell 70 to 80%. Other is papillary or chromophilic 10 to 15. Chromophobic 3 to 5, collecting that 1. Other is medullary RCC and unclassified. So clear cell 70 to 80%, mostly associated with VHL 3P. Generally circumscribed golden yellow color. And these are very hypervascular tumors. So it is mainly originate from proximal tubules. Papillary, similarly, it also arises from proximal tubules. Mutation in either in MET oncogenes 7 or 17. Type 1 and type 2 I have already told. And in acquired renal cystic disease, it is common. And there is multicentricity. Papillary have generally good prognosis as compared to clearer cells. Type 2 have poor prognosis. Type 1 have good prognosis. Other is chromophobe associated with Bird-Hogg-Duke syndrome. And there is perinuclear clearing or halo in case of pathological slides, or we call plant cells. So that is important. They are stained by positive Hales colloidal iron staining. Other important is medullary carcinoma. Generally, that is associated with sickle cell trait that have poor prognosis. So this is medullary. One is carcinoma of the collecting duct. That is also a poor prognosis. So what are the features of the RCC? If anyone asks in the exam, what are the features? So initially, they used to present with classical triad, that is hematuria, loin pain, or palpable swelling. So patient used to present late. So they present in advanced stage with palpable mass or hematuria. But nowadays, because of the increase in the investigations or screening tests like ultrasound, so most of the cases are diagnosed little earlier. So classical triad is found is only in the less than 10% cases or rarely. So most common presentation is asymptomatic or incidental. Then there can be symptoms related to the metastasis, local invasion, or paraneoplastic syndrome. So most common incidental. If locally advanced, then there can be hematuria, flank pain, abdominal mass, or perinephric hematoma. There can be involvement of the IVC due to the thrombus, or maybe sometimes due to the compression by the lymph nodes. So if there is IVC compression, then there will be bilateral lower extremity edema or non-reducing or right side varicocele. Due to systemic symptoms like other malignancy, there can be cough and hemoptysis if lung involvement, bony pain if bone involvement. There can be cervical lymphadenopathy, weight loss, fever, or symptoms due to paraneoplastic syndromes. So investigation, we have to do all the routine investigation, as I told, and then we have to do the metastatic investigation like LFT, calcium, ESR, prothrombin, APTT, all these investigation to rule out paraneoplastic syndrome and metastatic disease. So paraneoplastic syndrome, few slides regarding paraneoplastic syndrome, generally found in approximate 10 to 20% of the patients. So symptoms are due to ectopic hormone secretion by the renal tumors. So these are not related to the stage. These are related to the hormone secretion. So in general, what is the treatment? Treatment is nephrectomy or tumor excision, except in case of hypercalcemia, where medical therapy are proven to be helpful. So that you have to remember. What are the different types of paraneoplastic? Most common is elevated ESR in case of RCC. Other are hypertension, anemia, abnormal LFT or Stoffer syndrome, hypercalcemia in approximate 13% cases, polycythemia, and hypoglycemia in Cushing syndrome. Stoffer syndrome is a reversible syndrome of hepatic dysfunction in the absence of hepatic metastasis associated with the RCC and can occur in up to 20% of the patients. So they have non-metastatic hepatitis, increased ILC level, increased ALP level, and bilirubin level, hypoalbuminemia, or prolonged PT and hypergammaglobulinemia. So management is surgical excision. So what are the mode of dissemination? How renal cell carcinoma metastasize? Most common is hematogenous. Other is direct extension or lymphatic. Most common site is lung metastasis. What is pathophysiology or etiopathogenesis? So generally, there is a tumor suppressor gene, as we know, we have read in pathology, which suppresses the tumor. So if in case of renal malignancy, hypoxia is there, that decreases the activity of the tumor suppressor gene. That is most common VHL. If VHL is decreased, that suppress HIVF alpha, hypoxia inducing factor 1 alpha or 2 alpha. So if VHL decrease, so their activity increases, HIF 1 alpha or 2 alpha. They bind with the AR-anti receptor and then promote angiogenic factors like VEGF, PDGF, or TGF alpha that also promote glucose transport. So they increase the angiogenic activity or tumor progression or metastasis. So if we have understood this algorithm, so we can understand the treatment also. So if mTOR mechanism is also there, that also stimulate HI1 alpha. So if treatment part, there are mTOR inhibitor that will help in the tumor suppression, that is everolimus, temsirolimus. Similarly, there is HI1, HIF-2 alpha antagonist. If VEGF we are suppressing, that is bevacizumab. If we are suppressing VEGF receptor and PDGF receptor, there are multiple drugs like targeted therapy we call pazopanib, axitinib, cabozantinib, sunitinib, sorafenib, levantinib. We will go detail later. Similarly, other pathophysiological mechanism is by immunotherapy. How there is antigen presenting cell that present antigen to the T cells and suppresses the activity of the T cells by B7 co-stimulatory molecules that bind with this CTLA4. So if we give CTLA4 antagonist, so that will increase the T cell activity. Similarly, tumor cell present to the T cells by MHC antigen bind with the T cell receptor and PDL1 ligand bind with the PD1 receptor. So if we give these inhibitors, they will increase T cell activity and help in tumor suppression, mainly in the metastatic disease. So does screening is justified in case of renal malignancy? Routinely, it is not required because of the low incidence of the renal malignancy. But where it is required, mainly in the end stage renal disease, and in the patient with VHL syndrome or familial syndromes and in their relatives, and patient with tuberous sclerosis, that is also familial syndrome, and patient with acquired renal cystic disease. So what is the staging of the renal malignancy? There are TNM staging, TNM8 staging. T1 is less than 7 centimeter, T1A is less than 4, and T1B is 4 to 7. T2A is 7 to 10, T2B is greater than 10. T3A is tumor extending into renal vein or its branches or invades the PCS, that has been recently included in the 8th staging, or invades perirenal or renal sinus fat, but not beyond Girota's fascia. T3B will also extend to the vena cava. Thrombus will be below the diaphragm, but below the diaphragm. So T3A renal vein, T3B IVC below the diaphragm. T3C tumor grossly extend into the vena cava above the diaphragm or invades the wall of the vena cava. T4 invades the adrenal gland or go beyond the Girota's fascia. N1 is involvement of the regional lymph node. M1 is involvement of the metastasis. Initially, there used to be Robson stage, but nowadays these are not used. So I will not go in detail of Robson stage. What is the survival? If it is T1, or I can say T1 and T2, then there is survival of T1 70 to 90 to 50 to 70%, 5-year survival. But if there is T3, then survival gradually decreases 50 to 70 in the T3A, 40 to 60 in the if IVC, if renal vein involvement, and if it is T3B 30 to 50 and T3C 20 to 40. And most poor 5-year survival in if there is involvement of the adrenal or lymph nodes or the distant metastasis. Prognostic factors, there can be clinical, anatomic or histological. Clinical, if poor performance status, systemic symptoms, anemia, if there is hypercalcemia like paraneoplastic syndromes, elevated LDH, ESR, CRP, thrombocytosis, or elevated ALP. So these are poor prognostic factors. What are anatomical? If tumor is large in size, or there is venous involvement, or thrombus is there, or involving adrenal gland or surrounding organs, lymph nodes are there, distant metastasis. What are the histological factors that have poor prognosis? High nuclear grade, Fuhrman grading is there. Or there is certain histological subtypes like medullary or collecting duct that have poor prognosis. Sarcomatoid features, if there is tumor necrosis on the specimen. Vascular involvement, IVC involvement, or perinephric or renal sinus fat involvement. Collecting system involvement, positive surgical margin. So these are poor prognostic factors. If we ask what is the most important prognostic factor in RCC, that is staging. Treatment mainly depends whether it's localized, locally advanced, or metastatic. In localized RCC, there are four options. Either we can do radical nephrectomy or nephron-sparing surgery, that is partial nephrectomy, thermal ablative therapy, that is RFA or cryoablation, and surveillance. So if we are doubtful or there is a small renal mass, less than 3 centimeter are called small renal mass. Then there is role of renal mass biopsy. If it is generally 20% benign, if benign, then we can go for active surveillance. If indolent, then there are all three options. We have to see where, according to the patient's comorbidity and fitness for the surgery, active surveillance, ablation, and surgery. If potentially aggressive, then we have to go for excision. So one by one, radical nephrectomy. Robson did the first radical nephrectomy, and after that, what things we have to excise in case of the radical nephrectomy? We have to take out the kidney, or there is principle we don't have to go beyond the gyrotas fascia. So gyrotas fascia should be intact. So inside the gyrotas fascia, there is kidney, adrenal, and lymph nodes crushed to aortic bifurcation. But now this is of historical importance. We used to say what are the structures removed in the radical nephrectomy. Then that you can tell, kidney, adrenal, lymph nodes, or upper part of the ureter. But now, if there is no adrenal involvement in the imaging or palpable adrenal, then we can skip the adrenal. So it is not necessary to remove the adrenal always. Or similarly, lymph node excision is also controversial in radical nephrectomy. So this is radical nephrectomy, laparoscopic. First we have to clip the renal artery, then renal vein, and then we can take out the kidney along with perirenal fat inside the gyrotas fascia. So as I told, lymph node dissection is controversial. So what are the factors where lymphadenectomy will be indicated? If the tumor is of large size, means it is of more than T2A or T2B or T3 or T4. If high tumor grade is there, Fuhrman grade is high, sarcomatoid feature is there, histological tumor necrosis is there. Then depending on the how many factors are there are classification, Bluet's classification. If more than two or more than two, then there is chances of lymphatic involvement is high. Then we can go for lymphadenectomy. So what will be the surgical approach for radical nephrectomy? We can go through the flank approach, that is retroperitoneal or extraperitoneal, or intraperitoneal. We can go by subcostal incision or thoracoabdominal incision, or sometimes chevron incision. Similarly, we can also do the radical nephrectomy by laparoscopic or robotic approach. Laparoscopic also can be transperitoneal or retroperitoneal. Generally, outcome is similar. Retroperitoneal, there is less of ileus, so patient recovery is faster. Laparoscopic, generally we prefer for less than 8 to 10 centimeter tumor, and it is localized tumor, no surrounding organ involvement, no renal vein involvement, no lymph nodes. But survival is comparable as compared to the open technique. Coming to nephron sparing surgery, it was done initially by Jarnes in 1890, but later it was not so popularized. After 1980 or 1990, again become popular. So what are the indication of nephrectomy? If the tumor is in the solitary kidney or bilateral RCC is there, or if patient is having medical renal disease in opposite kidney, or hydronephrosis is there, opposite kidney, chronic pyelonephritis, stones, reflux, then we have to save the kidney. So we go prefer the partial nephrectomy or nephron sparing surgery. So we take out the tumor only, either by taking the small surrounding rim of the kidney or can do the enucleation. Then we repair the PCS or vessels and then close the parenchyma. So indications, absolute are anatomical or functional solitary kidney. Relatives are functional opposite kidney is affected by a condition that may be impaired renal function, as I already told. Elective surgery. This is also common. Localized unilateral RCC with a healthy contralateral kidney. So if a patient comes with a 3 to 4 centimeter tumor, if someone asks what will be your preference, then you will go for the partial nephrectomy. So if we can excise by the tumor by the partial nephrectomy, that is always preferred. So absolute indications are there, solitary and bilateral tumors, but if sporadic tumor is also small, then we have to go for partial nephrectomy. So a functional remnant of at least 20% should be there to avoid end-stage renal failure. If solitary kidney greater than 50% reduction in the renal mass, then there increased risk of the focal segmental glomerulosclerosis due to hyperfiltration injury. So patient, we have to follow up by urine routine analysis that will have proteinuria. So what are the prevention? We advise less of protein restricted diet or AC inhibitor we can give. So in case of the partial nephrectomy, other than CT or ultrasound abdomen, we can have CT angiography to see, look, how many vessels are there. So we have to apply clamp accordingly in case of partial nephrectomy. Complication, there can be bleeding, urinoma, other surrounding visceral injuries. So these are the complications in case of the partial nephrectomy. If bleeding is there, if that does not subside, if hemodynamic is stable, then we have to explore. Otherwise, we can do angioembolization if persistent. What is the surveillance after partial nephrectomy or radical nephrectomy? How you will follow up the patient? So in case of low risk patient, that is T1, N0, M0. In case of partial nephrectomy, we have to first we have to have baseline either CT or MRI within 3 to 12 months after surgery. Then we can follow up by ultrasound also up to 3 years annually. In case of the radical nephrectomy, we can initial study can also be ultrasound other than CT MRI within 3 to 12 months. Beyond 12 months, there is follow up not required. Chest imaging similarly by the chest X-ray for the 3 years annually. In case of the high risk, that is T2 to T4 or N1 or M1. Then abdominal imaging, that is we have to do by only by CT or MRI, initial imaging within 3 to 6 months. After that, we can follow up by ultrasound, CT or MRI every 6 months for 3 years and annually thereafter 2 year 5. So this is similar for both partial and radical. Imaging beyond 5 years is depend on the clinician, whether it is required or not. Chest imaging is also similar. First CT within 3 to 6 months. After that, we can follow up by chest X-ray or CT every 6 months for 3 years, then annually up to 5 years. In case of thermal ablative therapy, we can either do by the percutaneous approach or by laparoscopic. But what is the problem with the thermal ablative therapy? As in the partial nephrectomy, we have tumors, so there will be the lack of the histopathology or staging. And there are high chances of the recurrence as compared to radical surgery. So these are preferred in case of advanced age, comorbidities, or local recurrence, or hereditary multiple tumors are there. So two options, cryosurgery or radiofrequency. Cryo temperature is minus 20 degree. There are two cycles, freezing and thawing cycles. So, and in radiofrequency ablation, temperature is generally 45 degrees Celsius. How we identify the recurrence? If in the follow-up study there is enhancement on the CT or MRI, that is suggestive of recurrence, then we have to manage either by surveillance or repeat ablative therapy or partial or radical nephrectomy. So now coming to the management, I already discussed in T1, there are T1, T2, there are both options, partial nephrectomy, radical nephrectomy can be done by open laparoscopic or robotic. T3, T4, we have to do radical nephrectomy only. Now we have discussed the localized carcinoma treatment. There were 4 options. I am repeating again: partial nephrectomy, radical nephrectomy, surveillance, and ablative therapy. Coming to the locally advanced RCC, if it is involving other organs or there is IVC involvement, then it's locally advanced. There is not so role of neoadjuvant therapy or hormonal therapy or neoadjuvant targeted therapy in case of locally advanced. IVC involvement, generally 45 to 70% of the RCC with IVC thrombus nowadays can be cured. We can take out the radical nephrectomy or IVC thrombus. So survival has improved in case of IVC thrombus involvement. Generally, thrombus involvement in RCC occurs in approximately 5 to 10% of the patient. So symptoms I've already told: non-reducing varicocele, edema is there, pedal edema or enlarged abdominal veins, proteinuria. So these are features. Classification, if it is involving only the renal vein or ostium, that's in 1. If 2 is subhepatic, 3 is intrahepatic involvement, and 4 is above the diaphragm. Investigation same, CT, MRI, but MRI is preferred in case of abdominal involvement. If we still have doubt, then we can have then we can go for transesophageal echocardiography also, IVC cavogram also. So MRI study of choice in case of IVC involvement, or angiography sometimes. Level I have already discussed. This is level 1, vein involvement or diastase. 2 is below the liver. 3 is intrahepatic part also involvement, and 4 is above the diaphragm or above the liver, suprahepatic. Accordingly, management, if level 1, we can apply the side clamp and take out the tumor and kidney. This is for level 1. In 2, we have to also open the IVC to take out the thrombus. In 3, we have to embolize, we have to retract the liver, mobilize the liver, apply the 3 clamps, first below clamp, then opposite contrarenal vein, then opposite suprarenal vein clamp. Then we do the cavotomy, take out the tumor, and if it is also above the hepatic vein, then or we have to apply the clamp to the above the hepatic vein, then we have to also do the Pringle maneuvers. That can be done for up to 30 minutes. If it is locally advanced tumor involving other viscera, then we can also excise the other surrounding organs, or we can give targeted therapy. So adjuvant therapy for RCC include hormonal manipulations, radiotherapy. Radiotherapy generally RCC are chemo radio resistant. Vaccines are there, though not so commonly used. Cytokines are there. So generally used are targeted therapy, that is sunitinib, sorafenib, that I will discuss later. Interferons are not used nowadays. So coming to the metastatic RCC. So in case of locally advanced, what was the treatment? We can excise the tumor or can give targeted therapy, or excision followed by adjuvant targeted therapy. Metastatic RCC, generally 35% of the patients present with metastatic RCC. 20 to 40% of the patients which are initially clinically localized, gradually on the follow-up can develop the metastasis. Surgery is generally not preferred in case of metastatic RCC, though there are some indication for cytoreductive nephrectomy or surgery. Prognosis is very poor. 5-year survival is approximately 10 to 20%. 10-year is less than 5%. So there are targeted therapy and immunotherapy that are effective. So mainly targeted therapy are effective in case of clear cell RCC, and that is the most common type also. So what are the treatment options in case of metastatic? One is cytoreductive nephrectomy. We can excise the kidney or tumor. Then we can give targeted therapy. That is called cytoreductive nephrectomy. Other is hormonal therapy, chemotherapy, radiation therapy. Chemo and radiation are rarely used. Other is cytokine and immunotherapy and multimodal therapy. We can use multiple treatments. Prognosis is poor, as I already told. What are the poor prognostic factor, or how we can classify if there is visceral involvement like liver involvement, poor performance status of the patient, then there is more poor prognosis. So there are 2 classification of prognostic factors classification in case of metastatic RCC. Accordingly, we advise targeted therapy. One is Morger classification. If there is Karnofsky performance score is less than 80%, elevated LDH, that is more than 1.5 times, low hemoglobin, elevated calcium more than 10, or absence of prior nephrectomy, then these are given scoring. So according to the one score is given to the every point, accordingly we can classify. If 0 score, then it will come under good risk. If 1 to 2, then intermediate, and if poor, that is have scoring of 3 to 5. Accordingly, there is survival. If good risk, 20 months, intermediate 10 months, and 4 months in case of poor risk. There is another classification by Heng et al., also called IMDC classification. There are some differences. Karnofsky is similar as compared to previous, that is less than 80. There is addition of neutrophilia. Low hemoglobin is similar. Elevated calcium is similar. Thrombocytosis is there another addition, and less than 1 year from diagnosis to VGF targeted therapy. Similarly, there is classification. There are 6 factors, so 0 to 6, and accordingly there is survival difference. So surgical intervention in metastatic RCC, that is cytoreductive nephrectomy. Resect the primary tumor and then start the systemic therapy. Or we can do the metastectomy. If there is single metastasis in the lung, generally I can say in the lung, then we can also excise that lung part also, or lower part of the lung also. So that will be metastectomy. So if there is a question of RCC with solitary pulmonary metastasis, then we have to do cytoreductive nephrectomy along with pulmonary nodule excision if patient is of good performance status or good risk category. So cytoreductive nephrectomy generally indicated in good risk category. Otherwise, there is a latest trial that suggests that cytoreductive nephrectomy is not beneficial. That is Carmina trial. So we can directly go for the targeted therapy. Recurrence after radical nephrectomy generally in 1 to 2% cases. If there is recurrence, we can give targeted therapy or we can excise that recurrence. Hormonal therapy is not used. So this is only of historical importance. So we can remember no use of progesterone or anti-androgen agents. Rational or targeted therapy I have already discussed. So I will again explain. If we are giving against VEGF, that is ligand, that is bevacizumab. If we are targeted the VEGF receptor or PDGF receptor, there are axitinib, pazopanib, sunitinib, and sorafenib. If we are targeted mTOR pathway, that you have to remember the name of the drugs at least and mechanism mTOR, that are temsirolimus or everolimus. These are drug classification according to the immunotherapy that are called immunotherapy that were targeted or vascular VGF targeted therapy. These are immunotherapy. So if we are targeting PDL1, that are avelumab, atezolizumab, or durvalumab. If we are targeting PDV1, that are nivolumab or pembrolizumab. And if we are targeting CTLA4, that is ipilimumab. So what are targeted, as I already told, VEGF receptor inhibitor or VEGF inhibitor, that is bevacizumab, and tyrosine kinase inhibitor like sunitinib, sorafenib, pazopanib, or axitinib etc. mTOR inhibitor temsirolimus or everolimus, MET inhibitor like cabozantinib have role in papillary RCC. These therapy mainly have role in clear cells. So MET inhibitors have role in papillary RCC. Chemotherapy have role in collecting dirt, just for the sake of the knowledge. And immune checkpoint inhibitor immunotherapy I have already told. So there is evolution starting from the 1992. Initially, there were therapy like interferon or IL-2 therapy. These are not used nowadays. Immunotherapy. These IFN, IL-2 are not used. Then came sorafenib, later sunitinib, then sirolimus, everolimus. Now there is role of immunotherapy. Sunitinib, as I have already told, tyrosine kinase inhibitor, act on VEGF receptor or PDGF receptor inhibition. There are side effects. So one important side effect is hand-foot syndrome. So this is even more common in case of sorafenib. So a question come relating hand-foot syndrome, so we can tell sorafenib, or no option of sorafenib, then sunitinib. Other side effect I will not go in details. So this is hand-foot syndrome. There are lesions in the both hands and the foot. Other side effect, there can be oral toxicity, mucositis, stomatitis, thyroid depression, hypothyroidism, hetotoxicity, thrombocytopenia. So we have to follow up these patients by CBC, RFT, LFT, or thyroid T3, T4, TSH. So if there are side effects like, one more side effect is hypertension, that is in targeted tyrosine kinase inhibitors. So that is also suggestive of response. If a patient is on the targeted therapy and patient have hypertension, so that is suggestive that drug is acting. Drug have some good effect also. So other side effects are hypothyroidism, myelosuppression, gastrointestinal side effect. They don't require interruption of the therapy. But if there is hepato hand-foot syndrome or stomatitis, diarrhea, then we can either reduce the dose or we can stop the therapy or start later. Immunotherapy I have already discussed. PDL1 inhibitors, PD1 inhibitors, CTLA4 inhibitors. So this was all about the kidney tumor. Now I will also discuss in brief Wilms tumor. Other name is nephroblastoma. So this is the most common malignant renal tumor in case of pediatric age group, or I can say in 5 to 10 years. So this is an embryonal tumor arising from the nephrogenic blastomal cells. So there can be involvement of the all blastomal, epithelial and stromal cells. It is common in young children, uncommon in infants. In infants, there is neuroblastoma is more common, but that is mainly arise from the adrenal. Survival is good. Generally, these are 90% occurs in less than 6 years. Etiological factor is not well known. And there are no well-defined environmental factor also. So mainly these are associated with the syndrome, or genetic factors have to play a major role. What are the associated syndrome? Weger syndrome, that is Wilms tumor, aniridia, genitourinary abnormalities, or mental retardation. Beckwith-Whiteman syndrome have exome flow. So there is enlargement of the organs of the body, that is macroglossia, like tongue or gigantism, increased height. There can be another syndrome associated, that is Dennis-Dress syndrome. There will be gonadal dysgenesis and the nephropathy due to focal segmental glomerulosclerosis. So what is the presentation of nephroblastoma? Most common presentation is asymptomatic abdominal mass. We can appreciate there is a huge abdominal mass. Other symptoms are hypertension, gross hematuria, fever occurring in 5 to 30% of the patient. A small number of the patients who have hemorrhaged into the tumor may present with signs of hypotension or anemia or fever. So they can rupture also. So rarely patient with advanced stage disease may present with respiratory symptoms, either due to compression of the large size tumor or due to the involvement of the lung by the lung metastasis. Pathologically, these tumors have pseudocapsule, well-defined pseudocapsule. Size is generally they are large tumors, approximate median size is 500 grams, can up to 6 kg tumors are also reported. Generally, they can be hemorrhagic, cystic, or necrotic. So there are variable presentation with involvement of the fibrous septa is there. So this is well-defined homogeneous tumor of Wilms tumor specimen, cut mount specimen. What are the microscopic findings? I already told triphagic pattern, blastomal, epithelial, and stromal cell involvement. So according to the involvement of these, there can be favorable or unfavorable histology. We classify according to the stromal cell component, nuclear aneuploidia, nuclear pleomorphism, or abnormal mitosis or increased DNA. These are poor prognostic factors. Coming to the staging of the Wilms tumor. So children's oncology group classify into 5 staging. So stage 1, tumor is limited to the kidney and completely excised, intact renal capsule, tumor is unruptured and no residual tumor. In 2, tumor extends through the capsule but completely excised. Local spillage is there confined to the flank or biopsied tumor. Extrarenal vessels may contain tumor thrombus or infiltrated. In stage 3, residual non-hematogenous tumor confined to the abdomen, or there can be lymph node involvement, diffuse peritoneal spillage. So diffuse spillage is there, peritoneal implants, tumor beyond surgical margin grossly or microscopically, or tumor not completely removed. 4 is hematogenous involvement and 5 is bilateral. So generally question asked regarding hematogenous is what stage 4, 5 is bilateral. So as we classify the renal cell carcinoma, similarly we can classify them locally localized tumor or locally advanced or distant tumors. Most common site of metastasis is lungs. So on specific investigations, generally plain X-ray abdomen is not done, but if there is plain X-ray abdomen, because of the large tumor, there can be displacement of the bowel shadows. We can appreciate. There can be calcification, but though it are relatively uncommon as compared to the neuroblastoma. In IVU, similarly, any mass, whether it's a renal cell carcinoma or Wilms tumor, if there is mass, that will displace pelvic collecting system, or there will be distortion of the kidney. So these will be the features: displacement of the PCS or distortion of the kidney. Ultrasound, there will be large soft tissue mass. We can appreciate that may be heterogeneous echogenicity, which represents hemorrhage, necrosis, or calcification. Though it can be homogeneous also. We can also have idea of vascular involvement, though mainly by the CT scan or MRI. CT scan, we can demonstrate a well-defined heterogeneous mass with areas of well-defined heterogeneous mass, because there are involvement of the cystic and solid component, both are there. We can appreciate hemorrhage also, less commonly calcification also. This is CT scan showing hepatic metastasis. This is showing tumor in the kidney along with nodal metastasis. This is lung metastasis. We can appreciate. MRI can also show Wilms tumor. This is Wilms tumor in MRI. Or this is the tumor. So these are right-sided renal tumors. So what MRI shows? Well-defined heterogeneous mass with low signal intensity on T1 weighted images and high signal intensity on T2 images. So generally, what is T2 sequence? So we can remember World War II. So water will be dark. Water will be high contrast. So water will be white, means high contrast, like in the T2 image. So this is T2 image. This is T1 image. So there are two different school of thoughts. Either we can give chemotherapy first, then we can go for the surgery, and we can do surgery first, then chemotherapy. So there are two associations. National Wilms Tumor Surgical Group advise first surgery with complete resection, followed by chemotherapy if required. In SIOP, it's opposite. Surgery is always done after the adjuvant chemotherapy. After neoadjuvant chemotherapy, sorry. Prognosis, most important prognostic factor, just like RCC, it's stage. Other are age, histology. Generally, surgery with chemotherapy is required for stage 1 and 2 with favorable histology tumor. Surgery with chemotherapy and radiotherapy for higher stages. So if stage is stage 1 and 2, we can manage by surgery plus chemotherapy. If higher than surgery plus chemotherapy or with radiotherapy. So in this table, we can understand better. If stage 1 or 2 with favorable histology or stage 1 with anaplasia, then we can first do nephrectomy, then chemotherapy, that is vincristine and dactinomycin based therapy. Radiotherapy is not required. But if stage is stage 3 or 4 with favorable histology or stage 2, 3 or 4 with focal anaplasia, then nephrectomy followed by chemotherapy, vincristine, dactinomycin, or additionally doxorubicin we can give, followed by radiotherapy. If stage 2, 3 or 4 with diffuse anaplasia is there, that is also poor prognostic factor. With stage 1, 2 or 3 or 4 clear cell sarcoma of the kidney. So clear cell sarcoma of the kidney is also poor prognostic. Then we have to give nephrectomy along with chemo and radiotherapy. In chemotherapy, we can also give cyclophosphamide and etoposide. Similarly, 1, 2, 3, 4 stage and rhabdoid tumor of the kidney. That is also poor prognostic factor, rhabdoid tumor kidney. Then nephrectomy followed by chemotherapy followed by radiotherapy. We can also give carboplatin. So treatment, preoperative chemotherapy. In which patient we have to give preoperative chemotherapy? When tumors are bilateral, inoperable disease is there, then first we give chemotherapy, then there will be reduction in the size of tumor. Then if tumor is resectable, we can excise the tumor. So bilateral tumor, inoperable tumor, IVC involvement. So these are indication for preoperative chemotherapy. Other patient, we can directly go for the surgery. sometimes people also advise initial biopsy, then chemotherapy, then second look at 8 to 10 weeks for bilateral disease. Complication following irradiation, there can be scoliosis, hypogonadism, agiospermia, ovarian failure, and secondary malignancy. These are also tumor complication after chemotherapy also.